Hey guys, what is up? It's Wolfdog91 with the Black Trapper, and guys, I have had a couple requests to actually try and do a podcast. Yes, that's right, a podcast. So, due to the fact I'm not a really great trapper or anything, I don't feel like I can possibly try and tell people how to trap or what's best for them. So, I figured if I'm going to do a podcast, it might as well just be on all the crazy stuff I do in my trapping and just show y'all what I've been up to recently. So, should be episode 1 of the Black Trapper podcast. So, what we're going to do is go over an idea I've had, and this idea is a tossable 220 conibear. That's right, a tossable, as in pick it up and throw it instead of having to do a lot of extra work to set it. Now you're probably wondering why would I need to throw a 220 to set it? Okay, so let me back it up here and let me explain my thought process. Well, not my thought process, but how this idea came to light. So, if you're not common in my area, we have otter. We don't have a huge population of otter, but I know a lot of people come down here to trap otter. And that being said, I've always been kind of curious about trying to trap otter. So, with our creek systems the way they are, I'm always around a creek or something, and I'm like, I wonder if I can trap an otter here. Now, the problem is with that, though, I really don't like getting wet that much. You know what I mean? I'm not really a water trapper, I'm a land trapper. But otters are primarily water animals, as you would think. So, that's one problem. I don't like getting wet, but otters basically live in the water. Second problem. If you have never been in my area, you don't know how our creeks are. If you see a lot of water trapping videos, everybody has these nice little brooks that you can just walk into very nicely. They might have a slight slope to them at the very most, but you can just like walk down there. Their high bank may be 3 feet. A 3-foot vertical bank is their high bank. That's not what I have. Okay, I count myself extremely lucky if I get to a bank and it's not a straight shot down 8 feet into another about 4 or 5 feet of water. You know what I mean? I can't just go to a creek, walk down, and make a pocket like most people can. I really can't. Okay? Then you're probably going to say, well, if you set under a bridge. Well, in Mississippi, you cannot legally set under a bridge or within 100 feet of a maintained road, which is pretty much the only places bridges are here. We don't have bridges in the middle of the woods by a creek. We just don't. So, that being said, getting to water, unless I want to stop at every bridge and walk about 100 yards into the brush, which is pretty darn thick down here, to find a low spot where I can actually get down to, if you ask me, it's just not worth going after otter. And especially for me, I'm not an otter trapper. I've skinned one otter in my life, and that was roadkill. You know what I mean? Not saying that I won't. Otter tags in Mississippi are 25 cents, 50 cents, something like that. They're not expensive. But it's just a lot of hassle to go after otter, especially now since they're like, what, 30 bucks tops? It's just not worth it. But anyhow, I had this little thing. I was like, I'm going to try and catch an otter. But I had this problem with the high banks and everything, like I just said. So I get on a few sites and I'm like, hey, how do y'all, handle this who have high banks? A lot of responses I got. Now, this is about a year back, last season. A lot of responses I get, you just go down there. You just got to caveman. You got to find it. You got to do it. Jump in that water. Don't be scared to get wet, all that. Not a lot of help. Blocking up the creek, put a 220. Just not what I was looking for. Just the old standby. So that kind of discouraged me, and I just kind of dropped it for a while. And I was just like, ain't that, whatever. Well, last month, I was, looking under some bridges for turtle sign, because I can technically set turtle traps under bridges for snapping turtles. And I was just looking for some turtle sign. And with all the flooding we had this year, I was actually at Fort Lee, Virginia, so I wasn't able to experience the flooding we had this summer. But it was pretty bad from the pictures and stuff I've seen. So some of the worst flooding in over 50 years from my understanding. But anyway, with all the flooding we had, a lot of these creeks have washed out and they've made some pretty nice otter habitats. So this was this one particular creek I was looking under. I was under the bridge, and I go under here to look for turtle sign, and actually there's a group of otter under there. And me being me, I really don't have anything to do that time of day. And these otter really don't seem to care about my presence. So I say, you know what? I'm going to sit here and I'm finna watch these little fellas. So I sit down here. The otter don't really seem to care. They're swimming about 10 feet away from me. I'm just sitting there, just enjoying it. And the water isn't, super clear like you would have in Michigan or something like that. But I mean, it's not super murky like it usually is. So I can see what I need to about, all right, sorry about that, guys. Telemarketers, what can I say? They will not leave me alone. But anyway, as I was saying, something I noticed in the water, there was a lot of these old sewer pipes from the construction. I guess they just dumped them off in there. And these were about like the big 6-inch corrugated black sewer pipes. And there's a couple sections of them. And what I noticed is there are these little schools of fish. I guess they're creek chubs or something. I'm not really sure. Phone again. Anyhow, there are these creek chubs. I guess they're creek chubs, but there's these little school of pretty decent sized minnows. They may have been shiners or something. Anyway, they were swimming all around, darting in and out of these pipes. And the otter would chase them all through the pipes. The otter had no problem going through these pipes. And some of them were like half submerged. Well, not half submerged, but half silted in. And it was a pretty tight squeeze, to be honest. I mean, but they were just shooting through the pipes. And they were going after these fish. And the thing I noticed was, if there was a fish in their area, they were going to kill it. They probably weren't even hungry. I mean, from what I understand, otter and mink, and a mink is basically a little bitty otter when you really think about it, just like a muskrat is a little bitty beaver, in kind of a way. But anyway, they were going after these fish with killer drive. They wanted every fish they could find dead. They just kill it, kill it, kill it. So that made me think. Do I really have to block up a creek to catch an otter? That's an awful lot of work, especially with this deep water. Or if I can, say, take a 220 or a 330 and give them something that resembles a fish, aren't they just naturally going to go after it? I mean, they might not even be hungry. Usually when it comes to bait and stuff, like with raccoons or muskrats or something like that, you're not going to really catch them if they're not hungry. There are various situations where that's not true, but most of the time, if they're not hungry, they're just not hungry. They're not going to go after it. But in the situation of an otter, or what I presume a mink would also do from what I've been told, they will just simply kill it to kill it. So if there's an otter in the general area, he's going to be swimming around looking for stuff to kill. And if he sees something that gives an opportunity to kill, he's going to go after it naturally. So, that being said, I can have a creek that's probably, most of the creeks around here maybe 25 yards at the most across. That's not very big. That's a decent sized average creek. And he's going to swim around and he's going to look around. And say I have this 220 here. It's somehow having in the water where it's suspended where it should be. And on the triggers, I have something that resembles a fish. Let's say one of those, one of the smaller pike baits or musky baits or one of the storm minnows. That's actually what I use for this project. We'll get into it. And I have that suspended on the trigger somehow. And I have this 220 set in a way that when it goes in the water, it stands up where wherever he hits that minnow at, it's going to catch him, okay? So I've alleviated a lot of work I don't need to do, okay? So he sees it, he's not hungry, but his killer drive, he's going to go kill it. So he gets up there and he hits this bait with all his force, and a 220 catches him. And I was like, yes, that will work perfectly. But then I thought to myself, well, how exactly am I going to stabilize a 220 conibear or 330 conibear when I throw it in? You know what I mean? So I thought about it the whole time I'm still watching these otters. And then I see these corrugated black pipes. And then I think about a cubby. The way cubbies are made with, like, say, a 5-gallon bucket. you have a 220 and you cut the notches out, and then you would jam the 220 in there. And the way it is, it basically stabilizes the 220. And when you really look at it, if you've ever done this, made a 220 bucket, if you kick it, that 220 can roll. If you make it work and roll, it can roll any which way. But if he hits the triggers, it's still going to work. So I was like, you know what? That actually makes some sense. So I keep on thinking, and I keep on thinking. I think about, getting a 5-gallon bucket and doing that. But then I figure, high water or whatever, it could wash away the bucket. So I would need something that the water could go through a little better and, get some more visibility to the otter. Well, days go by, I kind of forget about it. But then it comes back up, and I'm looking around my whole experimental pile, and there's this old cage trap frame I made out of cattle panel. Now, I took cattle panel, and I say this section of cattle panel would be 3 feet. Okay, so I'll cut a 3-foot section so long, and then I'll cut 2 of those. Those would be the sides, and I'll cut one section that's so long, so wide, and then 2 of those would be the top and the bottom. And I'll just weld those together with a few tack welds, and then I have a frame. Never really used it, but anyway. That gave me the idea. Hey, I can make this out of cattle panel. So I goof around a little bit, cut some cattle panel, and I basically make this tube. It's a square tube about, I think it's about 2 foot long. It's if you look at the cattle panel, horse panel will probably be better, but it'll be heavier. But with the cattle panel, each square is about 4 inches, I think. It's 4 inches by 4 inches. So I took a section and I just cut 3D squares out. So I have one sheet. Okay, we'll call it a sheet. And on that sheet, there's 3 squares that are connected. So I cut 4 of those. There's 3 squares long and it's just 1 square. Okay, if that makes sense. I'm hoping explain this properly to you. If I'm not, please excuse me, but I'll try and put some pictures up for visual aids. But and I cut these, and the thing is, when you cut them and you weld them together, you don't need bolt cutters to cut these. You don't need like an angle grinder. So I cut them with some bolt cutters, and I made this square tube. Okay, I'll explain all that, and then I looked at it, and a 220 conibear fits almost perfectly in it. I mean, you can just basically wedge it in there, and it fits almost perfectly, and it still has extra room. And I was looking at it, I was like, well, them Otter were going through those half silted in pipes, so I'm pretty sure he'll go through this no problem, especially if he wants it. So, then comes the problem. How am I going to stabilize the actual 220? Because when it gets in here, it's all, it's still jingling around, so I need someone to stabilize it. I'm not a conibear trapper. I have one 220. I have a bunch of 5x5s I'm looking to try out, and then I have some 110s I use for barn rats. I don't have a whole bunch of stuff for 220. So I look around and I see these stabilizers, all right? So I'm like, okay, that'll work. So I basically make my own little stabilizer with some nails and some flat stock, and it will hold this 220 every which way. Then the real light started flashing, so I took that stabilizer, I put it halfway in the tube, and I welded it to the bottom. Then I take the 220 and I just push it in there and I clip it onto the stabilizer. Now I have, any which way you kick this thing, roll this thing, whichever way it falls, there's going to be a way for an otter to go in there. It's really pretty cool. I'm really going to put some pictures up here for y'all so y'all can understand this. But any which way it rolls or shifts when you throw it, it's going to land in a way that otter can still get in there and trigger it. So I was like, okay, that's going to work great. Next thing I did was I took the 220 triggers, I widened them out a little bit, and with some very thin wire, I took I think it was a storm shad or a storm bluegill. It was one of those really lifelike baits, okay? And I wired it in a way, it's kind of complicated. You have to wire it so it hangs properly and it will swim properly. So it's kind of hard to explain that. But I wired that to the triggers. So, and I wired it kind of stiff, so it hangs out a little bit. Now, with the really lifelike ones, if this gets in any kind of current, that little tail is going. It's going really fast. It looks like a real fish. It looks like he's just sitting there. If you've ever seen fish in like a small eddy in a creek, they don't move very much. They just kind of stay there, wagging, just trying to keep with the current. They just like staying in one little place. Okay. So I got all that hooked up, and now I basically have a way that I can take this 220, go on some of these deeper creeks that I have, and just stand over the edge. I can just kind of chunk them in. They're probably saying, yeah, but the water might open it up. It might, when you throw it in, the water will close the trap. It will trigger it or anything like that. And I've tried it. I've chunked it some good distances, and so far with a standard Duke 20 with this little setup, it hasn't closed on me, at all. It hasn't triggered itself or anything like that. So it seems like a very viable system. I've shown it to some people, and I've talked to some guys on Trapper Man, and they were like, yeah, you can wrap it with chicken wire and stuff like that. That's some stuff I'm planning on doing. But I'm not an otter trapper, so I probably won't even use this thing. I might get a tag this year and see if it works. But, it's a really great way. If the way I'm looking at it, the system I'm looking at using for it, is basically using this thing kind of like a minnow trap. The same places you would set a minnow trap in a creek, like, from what I've seen just watching otter, just watching them, they really like to hit hard points. What I mean by hard point is you have a creek, and from the bank, say, coming out a foot or two, you have a stick or whatever, okay? And that stick will, behind it, say it's facing downstream, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Behind that stick will make a slack water, and that's where a bunch of like little minnows and the chubs and stuff, they like to go back there, and they like to chill right there because it's a slack water. And what I've also noticed this with mink when I was at Fort Lee. From the barracks to the cafeteria area we have, there's a creek, and it runs through it runs through the area. I was on Ordnance Island, and this little creek runs through Ordnance Island. And it's not a really big creek at all. It's more like a little brook. But there's some water in it, and there's fish in there. And there's all these little limbs. And I noticed mink will do this too. The minnows would congregate behind these little limbs in this little slack water. And what the mink would do is he'll come down. I'm not really sure. It's hard from my memory if he came from the upstream or the downstream side. I can't really remember. But they will come up and they would hit this hard point. And they will go around. They will go fast. It's just like a dart. He'll hit that hard point and come right up around it. Like complete shock and awe. And just tag everything in that little circle. And if I had free time, I'll go down by this little creek. And I'll watch these mink do this. And they'll do it to frogs and chubs and everything. And I've seen otter on nature channels. They do the exact same thing. And also when I was watching them, they did the exact same thing. So what I'm thinking is, if you would take this system and you would put it in one of these little eddies or slack tabs or whatever you want to call them, where the otter are naturally going to be at, they're going to hit that corner and they're going to see that little minnow. And they're going to go charge straight forward in there and pow, it's going to catch them. But that's just theory. It seems to work pretty well if, I've talked to some mink trappers. And they would just take about a 110 to a 160 and all these little hard points right where it comes out, they'll stick that 220 right there, or that 110 or that 160, and that mink would hit it, and they'll catch them right there for blind sets. And apparently it works really well. So that's my idea on it. So, will it work, will it not? I'm not sure. But that's my idea. So basically, you throw this thing in, and you have a cable attached to it, say some 1/16th, 3/64 is probably going to be pushing it. It's probably going to be too light. But maybe some 7x7 or something like that. Some just some cheap cable or just rope, just some good paracord or something. You just chuck it in these little areas, and you can just pull them up if you have something in there. If you don't, you can just, you can just lower it back in. So anyway, that's my idea for the Tossable 220. This is my first podcast, guys. I really hope this was a good episode. If it wasn't, I apologize. I'll be trying to do more of these. If you have something you would like me to talk about or think about, PM me on T-Man, WolfDog91, right in the comments section. I'll see what I can do. So thanks guys. Thanks for tuning in. Like, comment, subscribe. I love y'all. I'm out.